Shalom Aleichem, Erev Tov. We are back together in Shiviti, UK. We're studying together the writings of Rabbi Shemtob Gaguine. The last few shiurim, those that were now and those that were in 2021, I can't believe it's been so long, we were discussing this misconception that Sephardim or the Shulchan Aruch are very lenient in halakha, and that Ashkenazim are known to be very strict and very particular about matters of halakha. In fact, today, just before I came here today, I received a question from a lady who doesn't really know me, but she was told to contact me because she has a very specific need for the laws of Pesach. And the rabbi that she asked the question to told her, go to the Sephardim, they're always lenient about things, so if you need an answer that you need, because I can't give you that answer, go find yourself a Sephardic rabbi. The only Sephardic rabbi she knew was me, and therefore she reached out to me. And I protest this miscategorization of Sephardic halakha. There is no desire among Sephardim to be lenient, nor I would say a desire among Ashkenazim to be strict. Rather, there's an entire understanding that halakha, the law, either permits something or prohibits something. It's not both. And therefore, there are those who stick to what the law says, and those who don't stick to what the law says. And those who deviate from the law can deviate in areas of stringency. And those who deviate from the law can also deviate in lenient places. So you may find that there are Jews who don't keep the Shulchan Aruch. When I say don't keep the Shulchan Aruch, it means either that they don't keep Shabbat at all, or they don't keep Shabbat at all by keeping too much Shabbat. How can I say such a thing? Because deviation from the law is actually not following the law. I know that somebody might disagree. If you're driving on the motorway or the speedway, and you're doing, Sarla brought this up at the end of last week's class, if you're supposed to go 65 miles an hour, and you're going 85 miles an hour, you're going to get a ticket for speeding. But if you're being extra safe and going 45 miles an hour, you're also going to get a ticket because you're not following the law. And this is crucial to understanding the next part of today's shiur. Really, after Rabbi Shemtob Gaguine tallies the 4 sections of Shulchan Aruch, and he tells us, in the laws of Orach Chaim, you find Sephardim are sticking to the law, Ashkenazim are deviating from the law. You find in Yoreh De'ah, Shulchan Aruch is sticking to the law, Rama is deviating from the law. Even HaEzer, Shulchan Aruch is sticking to the law, Rama is deviating from the law. Chosh HaMishpat, Maran, Shulchan Aruch is sticking to the law, Rama is deviating from the law. And last week we discussed a little bit about the laws of Shechita, and as it relates to Chalak or Galat or those other terms. The real question that we have is on the top of page 29. In the PDF numbers 27. Nishar lanu ladat. All that's left for us is to try to understand. Ma hayta siba shehiviya lRama lakachat hachofesh la'atzmo? What is the reason that caused the Rama to take the liberty, bekama halachot, in a number of halachot, lehakel bekama halachot, to be lenient in a number of halachot, שהתלמוד וגדולי הראשונים החמירו בכל תוקף, that the Talmud and the early rabbis and the Rishonim all were stringent about in every way possible. והוא התירם, and he permitted them. I have to tell you, there was a practical case that happened to me yesterday. As I just told you, I got back from Oregon. I don't know about the rest of the country, for sure not in the United Kingdom, but here in the West Coast, there's a very famous cheese company, a dairy company called Tillamook. Have you heard of Tillamook cheese? You could buy the kosher cheddar block in Trader Joe's. So I took the kids yesterday to the Oregon coast where we spent some time, and we went to the Tillamook cheese factory. Someone tell me, I'll do a little bit of chazara, how we make cheese. What are the ingredients of cheese? I'll help you out. Let's start with milk. What do you do after the milk?
Strain it.
Okay, fine, you want clean milk, but how do you make the milk into cheese?
You put an enzyme.
It depends what cheese. If you can just boil milk and add acid, and then you have like a simple ricotta.
Okay, so Miriam, that's one way to make cheese. So what does the acid do to the cheese?
Sorry, repeat that with me.
What does the acid do to the cheese?
It curdles it, so the protein separates from the milk solids.
Very good. In a traditional setting, let's say we wanted to make a cheddar cheese or maybe a Parmesan cheese. What would we use to make that cheese?
An enzyme.
An enzyme. Rachel, what kind of enzyme particularly?
They used to use an
Rennet.
enzyme.
Rennet. What is rennet?
Rennet is the lining of the stomach.
Shalom, Betsy. How are you? Rennet is the lining of the stomach. So essentially, you're also using acid, like Miriam mentioned, but this time you're using the one from the cow. The easiest way to do this would be you would take the cow's stomach itself and you would fill it with cheese, with dairy and milk, and you would tie the top of the cow's stomach, and in the inside you would have a cheese that would form this way. I see Yitzchak is on the call. Yitzchak, I once said that perhaps the reason why you find in Mexico, I'm not. There's a theory. I have no proof to what I'm saying at all. That cheese always comes in these round blocks is likely that was the shape traditionally of the cheese that came out of the cow's stomach. If I'm right or wrong, I have no clue. It was simply a theory as I was in Mexico looking at the cheese there. Nowadays, they kind of reverse that process. Instead of putting the milk inside of the cow's stomach, they put the cow's stomach inside of the milk. So I was in Seattle a few months ago in December, and in Seattle they have this famous cheese company. I don't see my Seattle people on this call. Matitiao, you remember what it's called? The Seattle cheese? Beechers. Somebody might know. And they have this huge vat. So imagine a bathtub, but like 6 bathtubs lined up. I don't know. It's very, very long. And in there they put milk. And then they take these enzymes, this acidic stomach of the cow, rennet, and they pour the rennet inside of the cheese, of the milk. And it turns into cheese by separating the liquids from the fats or the solids from the liquids, and one becomes cheese, the leftover, this liquid sticks around. Ultimately, they use that liquid in all kinds of products, and namely, what do they use that liquid for the most? What's left over behind the cheese? Miriam, you got me this far. It can't be you don't know the rest of this question. Have you ever seen in your food whey, W-H-E-Y, whey powder?
So that's protein. Yeah, that's the protein of the milk.
That's left behind after the cheese.
Yeah.
Yes. And so they use this to give a dairy flavor, I guess a creamy flavor, to many other foods, like even protein shakes, or you'll find it in random cookies or baked goods. There's a halachic conversation whether the whey has to be from kasher cheese or not, but I digress from the original topic. Essentially, the traditional way of making cheese, using rennet, the cow's stomach, is problematic because of, halachically,
Prohibition of cooking meat in milk.
Very good. The prohibition, I'm not going to say cooking, but mixing meat and milk. So Miriam, you're right. According to the Torah, the prohibition is only on cooking meat and milk together. You're not allowed to cook them together. According to the rabbis, you're allowed to have meat and milk together according to the Torah. But the rabbis added a further prohibition of not eating meat and milk together. And therefore, seemingly, this rennet inside of the milk would be a problem of meat and milk being mixed together. What about nullified in 60? It's not that much rennet that you put inside of a tremendous amount of milk. Why is it not nullified in 60?
On purpose?
Okay, so sorry, number one is on purpose. Anything you do on purpose is going to not be able to be nullified, but that's a different story. Aside from on purpose, there's one rule. There's one thing that cannot be nullified, there's a few things, but one main thing. Davar ha-ma'amid. Have you heard of a davar ha-ma'amid? A davar ha-ma'amid is a crucial ingredient that congeals the food. It makes the food what it is. Without the rennet, there would be no cheese. You cannot nullify a primary ingredient inside of something, and therefore nullification wouldn't work here. So then how do we eat kasher cheese if it has rennet? I'm not telling you it does. How can we eat kasher cheese with rennet? Our rabbis eliminated their prohibition of mixing meat and milk in the case of cheese on one condition. That a Jewish person either watches the rennet be poured in or pours the rennet in. Some say even the Jew has to own the company. Either way, I'm not getting stuck on the laws of cheese. But a Jewish person must be involved to make sure it is kasher animals rennet inside of kasher milk in order to make cheese. So what happens if a non-Jewish person makes cheese with the same ingredients as a Jewish person? What is the status of that cheese?
It's not kosher.
It's not kasher on which level? A biblical or rabbinic level? Rabbinic, very good. Now the rabbis added one more level to this decree. You find this in the Shulchan Aruch. The rabbis prohibited not only using animal rennet, but there's all kinds of artificial rennets that exist. So, and Miriam, you mentioned just any kind of acid. There are cheeses made using vinegar. It could be all kinds of things that people put in. But today you have microbial rennet, you have vegetarian rennet. Yeah, using that rennet inside of the milk technically would mean that the cheese is completely kasher. But the rabbis added a prohibition. Va'afilu ha'emiduha ba'asavim. Even if they use some kind of sour herbs or grass or whatever it is to make the milk into cheese, even then is prohibited on a rabbinic level. Why? Shema ha'emiduha, because maybe they're going to use actual animals' rennet. So that's where you know that your cheese has to be made by Jews or supervised by Jews. So yesterday I was in the Tillamook cheese factory. And as I was there, and they're making cheese, obviously not cheese that's going to be served in 5 minutes, but they give out thousands of cheeses, they give out cheese samples and everything else. And I asked them if they use animal rennet or vegetable rennet. They said that since the year 2016, that's going on 8 years, maybe even 9 years, they have not used any animal rennet in their products. They only use vegetarian, kosher certified, and halal certified rennet. All their rennet is kasher. So technically, what would it take for that cheese to become kasher?
Paying the OU.
Okay, I didn't want to make politics. Well, let's say I was there. What would I have to do to make that cheese kasher?
Maybe add that rennet to the cheese.
Right, add the rennet or even watch the rennet being added would be enough to make all the cheese in that factory kasher. Why only one block of cheddar cheese is kasher in the whole factory? Is probably because, like Rachel said, they only paid the kasher agency only once to come supervise that cheese. But for the most part, it's very easy to make cheese kasher. Now, from all the cheese products here, in Ashkenaz, the rabbis of France and Germany, they didn't accept this prohibition of the Talmud. They ate cheese that was made by non-Jews all the time. And so yesterday, I felt the price of being Sephardic. Usually, Ashkenazim feel the price of being Ashkenazi. Come Pesach time, there's all these foods they cannot eat. But I felt, yesterday I was in a cheese factory, all the cheese is technically kasher, but I am prohibited by Jewish law from eating the cheese that otherwise the French, German rabbis would eat. And why was I not resentful about it? Because I don't feel the Sephardic Chachamim were being stringent. I feel the Sephardic Chachamim were following the Talmud, which I am bound to follow. And the Ashkenazi Chachamim were deviating from the Talmud, even though the deviation happens to be very convenient. I would love to deviate that way, but I cannot possibly pick and choose when I wish to deviate from Halakha. So how is it, or why is it, that the Rama so many times in so many places felt that it was within his right or his need to deviate from the laws that were found in the Talmud? Let's look at the next paragraph. The answer to this question, Mitzatiha la'gaon, Moreno harav tzvi chayot. Nobody calls him that. I found it in the writings of Rabbi Tzvi Chayot, otherwise known as Chayes, otherwise known as Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Chayes. Why am I saying Chayes? Because he was Ashkenazi, and that was his name, and that's what they called him. And if his last name is Chayes, who am I to come along and name him Chayot? So, Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Chayes, he was of the opinion that there's a reason why the Rama was so lenient. Before I get that far, I once spoke about Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Chayes in one of my classes. I don't remember which class it was. Anyone remember anything I told you about him? He wrote a very famous book. He wrote many famous books, but this book is actually translated into English. It's his guide, the student's guide to the Talmud. He explains it. This one I brought an English copy so you could see it. It's an introduction to how you study Talmud, the history of the Talmud. This particular edition has some footnotes that are quite interesting and some other sources that are here. Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Chayes is actually a very famous Chacham, quoted very often in the traditional Ashkenazi Orthodox community. And my feeling that the reason why he's quoted so often is just because nobody knew who he was. Had they been familiar with who he was, likely they wouldn't quote him at all. Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Chayot is one of my favorite Chachamim. Really. A very special Chacham from Ashkenaz. I want to show you a picture of him. And I was going to print these out, but I didn't get a chance. So bear with me. And the Rabbanit is on this call, so she's going to appreciate this the most, if I had to tell you. Can you see this picture of Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch? Do you see it? Okay. Here's who he was. He was famously known as being a rabbi who was part of the Jewish Haskalah movement. The movement of early reformers of Judaism. In fact, that awakened everywhere that he went, and every community that he went to, the ultra-Orthodox Jews of that community, namely the Hasidim, made his life absolutely miserable. Everywhere he went, all the reform rabbis coming to town, and they decided to attack him. I'm going to just say one disclaimer. As I've told you many times before, I don't use the word reform in a derogatory fashion, so I don't, God forbid, intend to separate Jews. I'm simply repeating Jewish history as it was. So whenever Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Chayot would come to town, they would say, look at this reform rabbi coming to town, and they decided to protest his being there. Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Chayot, really his earlier connection, God forbid, with the, I'm saying God forbid sarcastically, with the Jewish reform, had to do with the fact that he had a very, very dear mentor in life. This dear mentor in life was a famous Ashkenazi rabbi whose works I have, and who was very much respected by the Sephardic rabbinic community. Another Reform rabbi. Let me show you his picture. I'm just going to zoom in so you can see it. Did you see this rabbi? Rabbi Nachman Krochmal. Rabbi Nachman Krochmal was one of the most beautiful rabbinic personalities that came out of Eastern Europe. In fact, I have all his writings here in an old volume. I don't think it's ever been reprinted, of Rabbi Nachman Krochmal. Rabbi Nachman Krochmal was a rabbi in Odessa. Odessa of his days was like a headquarters of philosophy and thinking and open-minded writers and scholars and all kinds of beautiful culture that was going on in his time. Rabbi Nachman Krochmal was a rabbi who very much believed that Torah could bridge everybody, regardless of people's personal observances or their personal philosophies or dispositions on life, that we could all rally around the same Torah. And so what he did was create a Bet HaMidrash, which some days I aspire one day our Bet HaMidrash should feel a certain way. In his Bet HaMidrash, Rabbi Nachman Krochmal opened the doors to everybody. He didn't care if you were Hasidic, if you were not Hasidic. He didn't care if you came from a background of the Haskalah, if you were a Reform Jew or not. He actually didn't care if you were a Karaite or a Rabbinic Jew. He was famous for making very, very, very big crossroads, or there's a word I'm looking for. He made a very special connection with the Karaite Jews of his time and really brought them close to him and to his Bet HaMidrash, only to be attacked by the rabbinic community that he was a heretic because he was too close to the Karaites. He felt even the Karaites and us share so much in common when it comes to learning of the Torah, that there's a way to bridge all of the divides in the Jewish people by uniting around the most powerful force that we have. That is the Torah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us. Unfortunately, he was persecuted viciously, mamash, until the end of his life, really to be dropped by what is known as the Orthodox community, and later to be adopted by the Haskalah, and therefore his books are always printed in places that you normally wouldn't think would print the books of Rabbi Nachman Krochmal. Chacham Uziel, for example, quotes him extensively, views him. He wrote a special book called Moreh Nevuchei Hazman. He wrote a book for a new Moreh Nevuchim, a new guide for the perplexed of our generation. He was a very, very special person. And so Rabbi Nachman Krochmal became a very close mentor of Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Chayes. And then he had one more teacher. And this teacher, not a teacher, a very good friend. This friend is known as really the founder of the Jewish Wissenschaft movement, and also was accused of being a reformer. I just want to show you who he was, because history gets rewritten, and it's very important to... Can you see this, Rabbi? Can you see it? Amash, spitting image of a founder of the Reform movement. Rabbi... His name was Rabbi Rappaport, and he was a very dear friend of Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Chayes. Unfortunately, what happened to him was that he was running for chief rabbi of Prague at the same time that Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Chayes was running as chief rabbi of Prague. And elections always brings out the ugliest inside of people. In these elections, the camps that were surrounding them decided to besmirch the other's name in horrible ways. I don't even want to tell you some of the horrible things that were said between them. Ultimately, Rabbi Rappaport becomes the chief rabbi of Prague. Rabbi Nachman Krochmal, Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Chayes doesn't win that election and stays in the city where he was with Rabbi Nachman Krochmal for a long time. And ultimately led to a breakup of their friendship. We don't find later in history that they were really so close to each other. But all of this history beside itself, when I was in yeshiva, even in Baltimore, they quoted Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Chayes so regularly. He's in the back of every Vilna Talmud that was ever printed. And so if you look here, I can't say ever printed, all the Vilna Talmudim that I have seen. Let's look at what he writes. He says in his book, Darchei HaHorah, I'm back in the PDF. Anyone who looks at the history, the life tales of the Jews in Ashkenazi countries, בימים הקדמונים, in the early days, נגד מעמד בני ישראל בספרד, in comparison to the Jews of Spain, of Sepharad, הנך רואה, and again his Sepharad he's using loosely as in Sephardic Jews, הנך רואה, you will see, כי בספרד, תחת ממשלת הערבים, that in Spain, under the rule of the Muslims, היו עמנו ישראל עצומים מאוד במספר. The Jewish people were a huge population. ומעוטרים בתורה ובחוכמה ועושר רב. And they were crowned with Torah, with secular wisdoms, and with a lot of wealth. והיו חשובים וספונים בעיני המלך והשרים. And they were considered to be very important people in the eyes of the royalty and the government. עושים מלאכתם בבית המלך. They worked in the house of the king. והייתה מלאכתם עיקר והמסחר טפל. And their professions were their main source of livelihood, and business, as in being merchants, was almost not what they were involved in at all. ולא הייתה איבה גדולה בין העמים ועמנו, and there almost was no hatred between that nation and our nation. He says almost. Of course there was anti-Semitism, and of course we ended up being thrown out of those countries. But for the most part, the Jews and non-Jews enjoyed cordial relationships with each other, out of mutual respect. Mutual respect. Ela. But היו אוהבים וחשובים וספונים אצלם, they were considered אולם. But מנת אחינו מדינות אשכנז היה רע ומר. The fate of the Jews in Ashkenazi countries was horrible and bitter. וסגרו עליהם הפתח, and they closed the doors in their faces. לא נתנו להם אחוזם בארץ, and they did not let them own land. ולא הניחום להסתפח בנחלתם מעונים ומעוטדים לכל מקרה ופגע. And they were destined for anything that could happen to them, bad happened to them. Every disaster, every calamity, everything. Ashkenazi Jews suffered tremendously. By the way, I've always said this. People have complaints. Ashkenazi rabbis wrote this, Ashkenazi Jews did that. I hear the Sephardim complain a lot. I need to say something very clearly, and that is, if I had to live in Ashkenaz, I wouldn't come out alive, let alone Jewish. The fact that Jewish communities thrived, and the Jewish communities wrote books and contributed to literature and observed halakha and prayed in tefillot 3 times a day and developed minhagim and had a Jewish culture that was alive and bustling and well, that's not a given. Their life was absolutely miserable. And if anything, so there's a few things we disagree about, or a few things that we don't, so what? So what? I take off my hat for 2,000 years of miserable Jewish history that gave us a beautiful community of Jewish people. A tremendous amount of Jewish literature. ואין הם שיעור רק המסחר והלוואה כנודע. And the Jews, because they couldn't own land, and they couldn't study professions, and everywhere they turned, the doors were closed in their faces, the only way the Jews really had to make money, aside from being merchants and peddling goods from here to there, what did he mention? Halva. What is halva? Loaning money to people.
Lending money.
Lending money. Very good. I gave a shiur about this in my Shiviti New York class. Was anyone in that class about money lending and the Jews in Spain? Are Jews allowed to lend money to people with interest?
Only to go in.
even to non-Jews, only in very specific instances, not everywhere, not everyone. And our Chachamim viewed it very poorly. The Jews should lend money with interest to other people. And in fact, in Sephardic countries, in Spain particularly, it wasn't done. It only began becoming an issue in Spain when, do you remember when?
Around the time of the Reconquista, when the two north and southern Spain regrouped under Christian control.
Okay, and then who brings that influence of Jewish money lending into Spain?
The north.
The north, meaning the French, German rabbis and the northern Sephardic rabbis of Catalonia as opposed to Andalusia. The Rosh, in particular, Rabbeinu Asher, he puts out this permission to lend money to people with interest. Almost immediately, you find, coupled with a decline in the Jewish education department, so the study of sciences and philosophies and any secular wisdoms, the decline of working for a living and all the things that we see as an influence from France and Germany, you find that ultimately the Sephardic community, which until then maintained very cordial relationships with the non-Jewish government, all of a sudden became moneylenders and pawn sharks. And the reputation of Jews taking people's money, it blew up in our faces because all of the stereotypes and the stigmas, that anti-Semitic tropes that surround Jews and lending money and taking people's money and feeding off of the poor and the weak, and all of that blew up. And our Chachamim, I mentioned a few of them in that class, ultimately blame the Spanish expulsion not on the Spaniards solely. Of course, they have their own anti-Semitic issues, but on the fact that the Jewish people began to do things which caused them to be hated by the nations of the world. I know that some people there really didn't like when I said that, because we never want to take any blame for anything in the world. But ultimately, this whole relationship with the non-Jews of we're not allowed to do anything, so the one thing we will do is lend people money. Who borrows money from loan sharks? People who are really in bad situations. Then ultimately the Jews make money by taking percentages or whatever else. And the irony of it in Spain was, who was making money from loan sharking? Who was the one who was making all the money there?
It's the king.
Racha, very good. The king. Meaning the king was using the Jews to make money. So the Jews were suffering all the anti-Semitism, while the king was the one reaping all the rewards of lending out the money. But you find this today. I don't want to speak current politics. I'm just going to say a sentence very vaguely. All the Jewish spokespeople for the various presidents and prime ministers and kings and countries, when they use Jewish people as their spokespeople, it's on purpose. It's on purpose. They know who the people are. They know who they're speaking to. They know who's going to get blamed for it if things go south. And that's V'day lechakima beramiza. I have enough. I said already. So let's continue. And so they are only able to be peddlers and loan money. In Ken haEshrach לא יגונה וצריכו להתנהג בדרך הקצר אשר הונח להם, אף על פי שיש בו צד איסור גם כן. The Jews, therefore, couldn't live an ideal halachic life. And therefore, they sometimes were lenient on all kinds of things, the way the people before them had been. The Chachamim and their rabbis, birot et achehem ki berahem, when they saw how much their brothers were suffering, u'ma'amadam b'mdinot halalu einam al tzad hayoter tov, and they saw that their life in these countries was really not good. הניחו להם מנהגם מפני החששה דאדם בהול על ממונו ויתירו לעצמם יותר. They said, listen, let them break these halachot, because if we start being too tough on them, they're going to break even more. וכמו שכתב הטור בשם התוספות, like the Tur writes in the name of the Tosafot, דהעידנא, that nowadays מותר להלוות לגוי בריבית מפני שכל עסקנו היום רק בהלוואה עמם. That nowadays we can loan money to non-Jews with interest, because that's our whole business. That's all we live from. ומי שמתבונן בקורות אחינו בני ישראל במשך זמן התוספות והראש והטור, יבין בנקל טעם ההיתר. And anyone who looks at the historical circumstances in which these rabbis lived and their Ashkenazi communities lived in then, will understand exactly why they had no choice to follow halacha on an ideal level. גם מפני זה הקלו בהרבה עניינים נגד הדין, משום איבה ושנאה. There's all kinds of halachot you find scattered around. That Ashkenazim had to be lenient because they were afraid of persecution from the nations of the world. They were afraid of hatred from the nations of the world. And therefore, they had to deviate from that which was written in Jewish law. But the Sephardim, Hishiru dinei haGemara b'chol tokef. They observed the laws according to the Talmud, and they did it very particularly, מפני שלא היו מוציאים שום הכרח להתנהג שלא בשורה. Because they found no reason to behave in a fashion that was not in accordance with halakha. So says Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Chayes, a prominent Ashkenazi rabbi, why is it that Ashkenazim sometimes had to deviate from halakha? Because they had no choice. Because life was miserable. And there were just some wars that the rabbis couldn't win. And they said it's better to give them an inch. They won't take a mile. Just give them what we need to give them so we can survive this horrible, bitter exile. The Sephardim didn't have this problem, says Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Chayes. And therefore, this wasn't really an issue. However, here's a very honest attitude towards why some people just don't observe halakha properly. You find in Jewish history that people, or even contemporary Jewish society, there are people who don't observe halakha. So what do? They try to come up with all kinds of reasons why it's okay not to observe halakha. The cheese, for example. Yesterday I mentioned cheese. I was in Seattle. And someone said, but I want to eat the cheese. I said, so listen carefully. Just say, I don't follow halakha, and I eat cheese that's not kasher. Big deal. We all do averot. You also do averot. Stop pretending like the averot that you do are all mitzvot. That already I can't handle. Just say I'm a human being, and I struggle, and all human beings struggle, and this is my struggle. Thank God that you struggle with mozzarella cheese and not with something else. Baruch Hashem, those are great struggles that you have. Other people struggle with tremendous things. Fine. But why pretend? You have a law, and you find now in the news in Israel, there's a Hasidic Rebbe being a sexual predator on other. But why? Listen, he's a predator. He's a criminal. I don't know, you should kill him or put him in prison. I don't know what you should do with him. But why pretend like it's mitzvot? He's bringing the Mashiach because of these avirot. He's healing people's souls. And that. Why do you have to pretend that everything people do wrong is good? Just people do things wrong. They do things wrong. And some people, like those people, lock them up. You never want to see them again. But here, says the Mitzvah Shchais, life was miserable. That's why certain things just couldn't, practically, we couldn't eat all the meat from the animals because we had to eat the meat. We couldn't throw away the meat. How can you throw away half a cow when you have no money, you have no job, you have nowhere to live, you don't own any land? So we have to find a way to make the animal kasher. I think Marlene pointed this out last week, right after the shiur. So I'm giving her a shout out to that. Says Rabbi Shemtob Gaguine, התנצלות הגאון מתקבלת במקצת בעניין הנוגע לדיני ממונות. Okay, I understand this and how it relates to business. You know, there are halachot, you cannot do business with idol worshippers. So, for example, the Ashkenazi rabbis lowered the status of idol worshippers. Christians are not idol worshippers. They're just monotheists who have some type of worship of another deity in between them and God. And even though that's prohibited for Jews, but it's not prohibited for non-Jews. Okay, we understand why in areas of business, or you're not allowed to sell to people before their holiday, or what would you do if you can't sell all your goods before Christmas, or whatever might happen. Fine. אבל מה יענה בעניין מיוחס סרחות, וכן בעניין לגדל כלב רע בתוך ביתו, וכן נטילת שכר לדון, וקבלת שכר לעדים להעיד, כי בעניינים כאלו ברור לי שאין הממשלה הייתה מתערבת באותו הזמן. There are all kinds of other halachot that the government doesn't get involved in. The non-Jews are not involved in, so why do you have to be lenient there? Even the animals, we mentioned because of money, but so what? Because of money you eat not kasher food. The government's not forcing you to eat cows, so you don't have to eat cows. Just say we're all becoming vegetarians. We can't do shechita properly, so what are we going to do? Uleidach gisa. And here you find on the other side of the coin. And this part is painful, particularly. It's painful. Why? אנו רואים כי הטור משבח ומפאר לעדת האשכנזים שהם זריזים במצוות יותר מבני ספרד. You find that the same rabbis who were breaking halakha right and left, they would praise themselves at how much more observant of Torah they were than the Sephardim. You ever heard this one before? The same people who are not particular about what's written in the Talmud or the Rambam or the Shulchan Aruch, all of a sudden always have a chip on their shoulder as relates to Sephardim. In which particular case, there's a story in the Torah. It's not a story, it's a statement. I brought some books from home. Give me a moment. Tell me who the Tur was, Matatiyahu. The Tur. T-U-R. He was the son of the Rosh. Tell me who he was. He was the son of the Rosh. He was a rabbi in Spain. His family ran away from France, Germany. They ran away to Spain, where his father became the rabbi there. There's a lot to be...
author of the Bal HaTurim.
Yeah, he wrote a book, commentary on the Torah. That's why. And he also wrote 4 volumes of the Tur, which is a precursor of the Shulchan Aruch. And I'm reading to you here from his brother. His brother was a very famous Chacham. By the way, there was a fact about him I was going to share with you about his brother. The father, the Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher, would actually stand up for his brother, Rabbeinu Yechiel. Whenever he would come into the room, he would stand up for his own son. And he writes the following. Katav Achi Harav Rabbeinu Yechiel Zichrono Livracha. My brother, the Rabbi Rabbi Yechiel, writes the following. וכן עוד מנהג באשכנז, שגדולי העיר מקדימים לתקוע. In Ashkenaz, the custom was that the great ones of the city would always try to blow the shofar first. כל מי שזריז בו יותר, anyone who could get to the mitzvah first, everyone would fight over the mitzvah, who could be the blower of the shofar. Okay. מה שאין כן בספרד, but this is not the same thing by the Jews of Spain. שבורחין מן המצוות. They run away from the mitzvot. Is a compliment or not a compliment, running away from mitzvot? If I tell you the Sephardic Jews, they run away from mitzvot, well, how do you interpret that?
No, it's not supposed to be a compliment.
It's not a compliment. Meaning, Ashkenazi Jews are fighting over who can build a shofar, not like the Sephardim who they run away from the mitzvot. עד שצריכים לשכור אחד מן השוק לתקוע להם. They have to go to the market and pay somebody to blow the shofar for them. So 2 problems. 3 problems. One is nobody wants to do the mitzvah of blowing the shofar, unlike the Ashkenazim who fight over it. 2, they have to pay someone to blow the shofar, because aside from that, unless it's for money, these guys don't do mitzvot. And 3, who do they bring? Not even a good person. They go bring some random person from the market, like some lowlife. ולא ידעתי מאין מצאו להם היתר זה. And I have no clue where they found this leniency. What's bothering him? The part that people are getting paid to do a mitzvah. Now really the Shulchan Aruch, the Beit Yosef, Maran disagrees. He says you can pay someone to do a mitzvah, especially if it's going to ensure the mitzvah is done properly. Let's put this aside for right now. The conversation whether or not you can pay people to do mitzvot. Who's complaining that Sephardic Jews don't care about mitzvot because they hire people to blow the shofar? These are the same rabbis who get paid to sit in a bedin, right? Which is against Jewish law. We discussed that at the end of the last cycle. The same rabbis that take money to be witnesses in court. They pay the witnesses in court. We discussed all of that in the section on judges and courts in this Shiviti UK class. So now what's your problem? The Sephardim, they're not so careful about mitzvot. They don't run to do the mitzvah. Rabbi Shemtob Gaguine takes big issue with this. I'm going to show you in just a moment. Let's look together here, back in the PDF. On the top of page 30 or 28 in the PDF numbers. אבל מרן הבית יוסף שם משיג עליו. But Maran, the Beit Yosef, he argues with him. באומרו כי נתינת שכר לקיים המצווה, אין איסור בדבר כלל, ושלא כדברי הרב יחיאל. He disagrees with Rabbeinu Yechiel at all, and he says there's no problem with taking money to blow the shofar. ואני מצידי, יש עוד להעיר עליו. But I have my own personal complaint or objection to what the Torah writes. עתיה ראשונה לא כל אדם בקיא לתקוע. Not everyone knows how to blow the shofar. How many of you know how to blow the shofar? Anyone here know how to blow shofar? No, it's not so easy. You take a horn, it looks like you just blow it. It doesn't blow like that. You have to practice how to blow a shofar. So not everyone knows how. So the fact that people don't fight over blowing the shofar is likely because there are not so many people who know how to do this mitzvah. So why blame it on their lack of care for mitzvot? They run away from mitzvot. Maybe they just don't know how to do this mitzvah. Why are you beating up people that are inadequate in something by blaming them for it? It's not a good thing, says Rabbi Shemtob Gaguine. כי בעניין התקיעה יש בה חוכמה ומלאכה ודרוש כוח לתקוע. By the way, not just you need to know how to do it and practice how to do it. You need the strength to do it. Look, I'll give you an example. In the Kehillat, I blow the shofar. Yeah, I blow the shofar. I lead the tefillah. And it's hard to blow shofar. You lead tefillah. I give the speeches. Maybe the speeches are hard for other people to have to listen to all of them. But for the most part, I do all of those things. If it wasn't for Doron or Itai or some people that are in the Kehillat, maybe Yaakov, people that read the Torah for me, so I would also have to do that. My father also reads Torah. Meaning, if I had to do everything, who says you have the strength on Rosh Hashanah to do all of that? Or let's say you know how to blow the shofar, but that person gets old. It's hard. You have to blow all of those. It's not so simple to find people who can all blow the shofar. Shenit, what's the second? Ma bekach im ish min hashuk yitka. Who cares if it's some other person from the market who's going to blow the shofar? Halosh shanim b'mishnah. We learned two things. One in the Mishnah. Ha'over lifnei hateva b'yom tov shel Rosh Hashanah, ha'sheni matki'a. That the one who is the chazan on Rosh Hashanah, the second chazan is the one who blows the shofar. What does this Mishnah mean? Do you know the context of the Mishnah? When do we blow shofar blowing on Rosh Hashanah? Which service does it belong to? Okay, let's start in the morning of Rosh Hashanah. There are two tefillot. What are they? Yeah, Shacharit and Musaf. We blow the shofar as part of which service? Yeah, beginning of Musaf. Very good. Why? Why do we do it there? Every mitzvah, we try to do it as early in the morning as we can. So why don't we do the shofar blowing earlier in the day? Why do we wait until Musaf?
Maybe because not everybody's in the shul yet, so we'll delay it so that more people can hear it.
Miriam, that's good. So the lazy people didn't come to Beit HaKnesset yet on time, so we're waiting for them. In the olden days, it was the other way around. Olden days, people would leave, but if things would take too long, they would leave because they were all awake at 5 o'clock in the morning anyways. Today, we have exactly the opposite problem. You're right. But that's not the reason. Tell me about the Romans. Did the Romans let us blow the shofar?
Okay, so definitely.
Right, they didn't. But the Romans only would send guards to watch our services for the services they knew about, like Shacharit. The guards didn't know that we add extra services. Musaf was like a random prayer that we added on. That's why it's called Musaf. It's an additional prayer. It's an additional sacrifice. There's something else we do in Musaf because of that. We don't say Shema Yisrael in any other Kedusha, in any other repetition of the Amidah, except for by Musaf. Over there they say Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Why do you do it there? Why? Because the guards that are watching our services already left. And so the institution of blowing the shofar, though it should have been done earlier in the day, we blow it later in the day so that the persecution of the government passes from us. So this halakha says that the chazan of Shacharit does not blow the shofar, rather the second one blows the shofar. Rabbi Hai Gaon dikdek mize, and Rabbi Hai Gaon, he analyzes from here, and first from here, the ke'amar hasheni matki'a velo amar toki'a, alma echad toki'a velo shaliach tzibur. You see that aside from that, it doesn't say toki'a, it says matki'a, which means somebody else can blow the shofar. It does not have to be the chazan of Musaf who also blows the shofar. It doesn't have to be. So what do you care that they go find somebody else to blow the shofar? Why does that bother you so much? Dayek mina, achad tokea, acher tokea, yeh mi sheyeh. That whoever wants can blow the shofar. Ven min hatzorech latur ulchapes echad migdolei ha'ir litkoa. You're bragging that in Ashkenaz, all the great people of the city, they would fight over the shofar. Who cares? You just have to have somebody who knows how to make a sound with the shofar. And then he says something controversial. I don't want anyone to get offended from it. I will explain it. So please don't get offended from me till I explain it. Then afterwards you get offended. But first, אם התירו אפילו גר יכול להיות שליח ציבור, כל שכן וקל לחומר לאיש ישראל שהורתו ולידתו בקדושה. If for a chazan we allow someone who converts to Judaism to be a chazan, so how much more so that we would allow any Jewish person, meaning we're including all Jewish people can do the mitzvah blowing the shofar. Why would you think that a ger could not be a chazan? Are you familiar with this prohibition of a convert being a chazan? Not a prohibition. Why would someone think to stop a convert from being a chazan?
I don't know if it goes back to there is a basic difference between the approach of the Ashkenazim and Sephardim is like the Sephardim we include the children, we include the community.
But what would be the grounds? What would be the basis to say that a ger cannot be a chazan for us? Why would someone say that?
I mean, the only thing I could think of is that maybe they don't know all of like the traditions or tunes, and perhaps they could make like a mistake or just a prejudice.
Oh, okay, wait. So the first one, Miriam, the first one, which would be anybody, even somebody born Jewish who doesn't know how to lead services, shouldn't lead services, right? So the second one, we're hoping it's not going to be a prejudice. There must be, if the Shulchan Aruch is going to talk about it, it must be something more than prejudice. Let me read to you what Shulchan Aruch writes. If you look in chapter 53, Avorach Chaim, in the Shulchan Aruch, Maran writes, Yesh mon'im ger miliot shaliach tzibur. There are those who, mon'im, a good word, they don't allow or they abstain from allowing a ger to be a shaliach tzibur. V'nitchu divrehem. And their words have already been discarded or pushed away. We don't, meaning, says Maran, can a ger be a chazan? Yes, we don't even take their words into consideration. So what are those words? Meaning, what exactly was it that was the problem? I'm reading to you now from the Beit Yosef. Same halacha, Nun Gimel, in the Beit Yosef. Katuv b'Mordechai. One of the great Ashkenazi rabbis, the Rishonim, his name was the Mordechai. He writes, Shebe'ir Würzburg. I don't know where Würzburg is, but I think that I'm saying it right. Man'u lager miyot shaliach tzibur. They don't allow a ger to be a shaliach tzibur. Mipenei she'eno yachol lomar Elohei avotenu. He's unable to say the words, our God and the God of my forefathers. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu was not the God of his forefathers. And what's the proof? There's a Mishnah. The Mishnah says that when a ger, in Masechet Bikurim it says, ger keshu mitpalel beno leben atzmo, omer Elohei avot Yisrael. He says, the God, my God, and the God of the fathers of the Jewish people. Uchshehu bevet hakneset, omer Elohei avotechem. And when he's praying in the synagogue, he says, the God of your forefathers. Have you ever seen a special siddur for gerim that has in it all of the my God and the God of my forefathers taken out? Have you seen such a thing? I don't want to give anybody any ideas because I definitely know some Batei Din that would love to put together such a siddur. I'm not interested in giving people bad ideas. So why not? Why, if that's what the Mishnah says, is that not what's done? Later in the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda says, Ger atzmo mevi. A ger can bring his bikurim offering, and he says, V'koreh, and he reads for himself, Ma tam, how could he say, my God and the God of my fathers? Ki av hamon goim netaticha, because Kadosh Baruch Hu is the God of Abraham, and Abraham is the father of all people who believe in the way of Abraham. And therefore, anybody who's a ben Abraham is literally the child of Abraham and is able to say, Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu. And even though that goes against what it says in the Mishnah, says Maran that all of the Chachamim rule like the Talmud over the Mishnah, and that's why you see that that is being said. By the way, if you wanted a halachic proof to this, all you have to do is open up the Rambam. The Rambam in the 4th chapter of the laws of Bikurim. The Rambam writes the following. Hager, mevi v'koreh. When the offering of the Bikurim is brought to the temple, a convert also reads the offering. Lefi shneimar le'Avraham, because it was said to Avraham, Av hamon goyim netaticha. I have made you the father of numerous nations. Harei hu av, kol ha'olam kulo shnichnasim tachat kanfei hashekhinah. Says the Rambam, Avraham Avinu is the father of all people who are under the wings of the Shekhinah. There's a famous letter that was written to Ovadiah Hager. I've taught this before in different classes. I'll just mention it briefly because I see that my time is almost up. Ovadiah was a convert who reached out to Maimonides, the Rambam, saying, I have a rabbi, and my rabbi is making fun of me because I'm a convert. And the Rambam is livid. The Rambam is so upset. He sees that it's not a new problem, by the way. What some people experience, it's not a new problem. It's maybe sad that it's an old problem. But the Rambam says, your rabbi is doing an avera, and he's doing the wrong thing. And after all of that, he also explains to him the following. I want to read to you. I am reading from the edition that's in my book. I don't know if this is Harav Kapach's translation or not. He says, Ikar hadavar, my main point, says the Rambam, שאברהם אבינו הוא שלימד כל העם, והשכילם, והודיעם דת אמת, וייחודו של הקדוש ברוך הוא. Avraham Avinu is the one who taught the nations of the world the oneness of God and the true faith. ובעט בעבודה זרה והפר עבודתה. And he's the one who kicked עבודה זרה. He got rid of it and fought against it. והכניס רבים תחת כנפי השכינה ולימדם והורם. And he brought many people under the wings of the Shekhinah and he taught them. וציווה בניו ובני ביתו אחריו לשמור דרך השם. And he commanded all of those who came after him, his children and those members of his household, to go in the ways of Hashem. לפיכך, and therefore, כל מי שיתגייר עד סוף כל הדורות, that anybody who converts until the end of time, וכל המייחד שמו של הקדוש ברוך הוא כמו שהוא כתוב בתורה, and anyone who unifies the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu as it is written in the Torah, תלמידו של אברהם אבינו עליו השלום, ובני ביתו הם כולם, is a student of Avraham Avinu and is a child, a member of the household of Avraham Avinu. Everybody. והוא החזיר אותם למוטב. And Avraham Avinu is the one who brought them back to the good. כשם שהחזיר את אנשי דורו בפיו ולימודו, כך החזיר כל העתידים להתגייר בצוואתו שציוותה את בניו ואת בני ביתו אחריו. Avraham Avinu, just like he convinced the people of his generation to believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu and he brought them to the path of God, so too all of his children and grandchildren in history who bring back people to the faith of God are considered members of the family of Avraham Avinu. נמצא אברהם אבינו עליו שלום הוא אב לזרוע כשרים ההולכים בדרכיו. Avraham Avinu is therefore the father of all kosher Jews who follow his footsteps. This is very important. Just because you're born Jewish doesn't make you a Jew who's a child of Avraham Avinu. I'm sorry to break it to the Jews who think they're born into some kind of country club. There's work that you have to do. You want to be Jewish, it's fine. You're born, great. But you have to also make choices that are in the way of Avraham Avinu. ואב לתלמידיו וכל גר שהתגייר. And Avraham Avinu is the father of all of his students and all of those who convert to the Jewish faith. לפיכך, and therefore, יש לומר, a person should say, Eloheinu ואלוהי אבותינו, my God and the God of my forefathers. שאברהם עליו השלום הוא אביך, says Rabbeinu HaRambam to Ovadiah the convert. Avraham is your father. ויש לך לומר, and you should say, שהנחלת את אבותינו, he gave us this land to our forefathers. של אברהם נתנה הארץ, הקדוש ברוך הוא gave Avraham the land. של אברהם ניתנה הארץ. שנאמר, קום התהלך בארץ, אורכה לרוחבה, כי לך אתננה. If Avraham Avinu received the land of Israel, and you are a child of Avraham Avinu, then you also can say that this land and these fruits that I'm bringing were given to me by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, my God and the God of my fathers, on the land that was given to me and to my forefathers. And says Rabbi Shemtob Gaguine in one last sentence, that if you see that in other places in the Shulchan Aruch, the Maran writes, ואם יאמר האומר, הלא מרן עצמו פסק בשולחן ערוך הנוטל שכר לתקוע, אינו רואה סימן ברכה. That a person who takes money from blowing the shofar does not see blessing from that. אבל לא כתב שעשה איסור בזה כאשר חשב רבי יחיא. והכנסת הגדולה כתב שהוא מותר לקח שכר מדינה. And if you wish to say that Maran writes elsewhere, you shouldn't take money, you don't see a blessing, or elsewhere he says, you shouldn't take money, you shouldn't hire chazanim to be chazanim. Fine, all of that is true. When Maran says you shouldn't, does not mean that it is a prohibition, he only means that it's something you shouldn't do. There are reasons not to do it. But I think I wish to end where I began. And that is, we discussed about better or worse. We discussed who's more lenient, who's more strict. We discussed who's really Reform rabbi and who isn't. We discussed at the end, are converts actually Jews or are they not? Can they lead our tefillah or not? I think it all boils down to the same question. Are you a child of Avraham Avinu or not? Do you do your best to follow in the footsteps of Avraham Avinu or not? I think when we sit down together, we have to stop with all the loyalties or the cliques or the feelings of let's keep ourselves together, let's reject those people, let's reject these people. Ultimately, look around the room. All of us come from different places. All of us maybe came from different backgrounds, religiously, ethnically, culturally, but all of us are learning Torah together. Like the Ben Midrash of Rabbi Nachman Krochman. We all recognize that the one thing that can bind us together, that can be our common denominator, that can tie us all together, is our connection to the Torah, be it what it is. Be it what it may. My English is slipping, Chava. But for right now, I wish to end this note in the Shiviti. We all strive to be from the children of Avraham Avinu, the students of Avraham Avinu. And that's the only thing that we look at here. And Avraham Avinu was a person who loved all of humanity, who cared for all people. We're about to come into the holiday of Pesach. Likely this will be my last class before Pesach. For those of you who are with me in person, so I'll have 2 more classes after Pesach, B'ezrat Hashem, and then I will be in London for a week. I know she's not on the call anymore, but for Betsy and Doron's wedding, B'ezrat Hashem Yitbarach, I hope to spend a week in London. I would love to see you. I would love to put together a shiur or 2 while we're there. I'll be in touch more as we get closer to that. But for right now, before we come to the Pesach holiday, to recognize that we all left Egypt. It doesn't matter when we joined Am Yisrael. We all left Egypt together. We all left the Har Sinai together. We left from Har Sinai to Eretz Yisrael together. We were exiled from Eretz Yisrael together. And all that has happened to us in these last years of exile that has made us feel apart and apart and apart, it's not important. It's really not important. Sure, we should sit down and reanalyze and hash out and what should we keep and what should we not keep, what should we adopt and what should we get rid of. I'm open to all of that. But at the end of the day, our only loyalty, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us a Torah. That Torah unites all of us. Our father and mother, Avraham and Sarah, parents are always happy to see their children together. Just like we're happy to be sitting with our families at the Seder table in 2 weeks from last night. Today is Rosh Chodesh Nisan, my Yair's birthday. And 2 weeks from now, HaKadosh Baruch Hu would be happy to see all the Jewish people sitting around the same table. Banecha kishtine zetim saviv l'shulchanecha. When parents see their children surrounding their table, it's the greatest pride in the world. Maybe it's time to give HaKadosh Baruch Hu the same happiness. And to say to the Jewish people, we can still do the things that we do differently and argue differently and consider who's better and who's worse. You want to fight our whole life? Fight your whole life. But the one thing we could give the Creator of the universe, maybe a little bit of joy this holiday, to see that He took us out together, He gave us a Torah together. God willing, we should spend the rest of our lives together. Thank you for learning Torah with me together. Thank you for reviving this Bet Midrash together, this class. For a long time, we didn't have it, but I so appreciate that we have it again. And B'ezrat Hashem Yitbarach, I look forward to continue learning with you, either before and after Pesach.